it going? Okay. Well, hello. Here we are visiting you from the Wildwood Path. My name is Trevanna Frost, Littlefield, Grenfell. I go by the pronouns she, her, hers, and they, them, theirs. And I'm a staff person at the Wildwood Path, and I'm excited to be here today with my colleagues to share a little bit about wildlife tracking.
Hi, I'm Estephanie Martinez-Alfonzo, and I too am with the Wildwood Path as a staff, and am here to help show you and for all of us to learn about tracking.
My name is Hanlon Kelley. I've been a participant in the Wildwood Path 2 separate years, and I love tracking and trailing. And I use she, her pronouns or they, them pronouns.
I forgot my pronouns.
Same for you.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, so I had proposed we would submit a tracking instructional video that people could watch online, and I had this idea that we would do this like with slides at the computer and would show all the details about wildlife tracks, you know, and sign. And I tried to do that, and it was just really boring. And so we decided to do this instead, which is to gather on this beach. This is a beach that I call Birthday Beach in my family, and today is actually my birthday, and so we're here at the beach celebrating my birthday by recording this video for you. And our idea is just to kind of give a quick overview of tracking, and then to show you a little bit about how tracks might look, and then how different kinds of patterns might look that you'd see on the ground, and a little bit of a hint into the world of tracking with animal sign, which is not the footprints, but other kinds of sign that they leave in the wild. With the impression that, the idea that you would start to be a little bit more familiar with what animals are leaving as evidence of their presence in your neighborhood, and that you can start to sense yourself as being part of a community of other creatures. So the idea isn't not to know everything about tracking, but just to feel excited about tracking, and acknowledging that we all have different levels of experience and that there's always a lot to learn. And so if you're coming into this tracking talk knowing a lot about tracking and having a lot of data points, then maybe you can find a way to learn a little bit more and add to that just by just trying things out. And if you're totally a novice, then just don't worry about taking all the information in, just kind of enjoy the experience and see what inspiration strikes you about tracking. And I'll say, you know, just from myself, and maybe you all feel this way too, that I really feel like tracking is part of how I communicate with the wild. It's part of the language of the wild. And a lot of the old stories I've heard over the years start with phrases about a long time ago when all the creatures spoke the same language. And I think of those languages, like what are those languages that we can learn to speak? And one of them is bird language that we teach at the Wildwood Path. And another is tracking, and you know, to translate that into my kind of colonizer mind, I would think of it sometimes as like the writing. So the tracking is like the hieroglyphs or the letters that are showing the stories that are happening all around you. So it's written in the landscape everywhere, all the stories of all the amazing things that are happening. And so I tend to imagine the individual tracks, like these tracks here, as letters, and I tend to imagine the patterns as like the trails as well, I guess the patterns would be more like the grammar, like putting it all together, and then the trail itself that you follow over time and actually just get to live into and experience is like the story. It's like you're reading the story as you go. So I think there's a balance that can be struck between wanting to get really detailed and focused on the specific data, the specific information about the tracks and the trails and the measurements and the details, which you need to do in order to be able to know who you're tracking and what's really going on in the aging. But it can also be kind of overwhelming, and sometimes it's nice to just release that and just look at the trail and feel the trail and follow it. And Hanlon and I were in a wildlife trailing apprenticeship. Was it 2 years ago? Last year?
It was just last year.
Last year, so
yeah.
An eternity ago.
Yeah.
And that was focused on following trails. And so I just asked her before we started filming this, like, do you have any memories of times when you were able to just kind of like release and just follow a trail? And it wasn't like you necessarily knew everything about the tracks and the trail, but you could have that kind of dropped in experience of following the trail. And she said that happened a lot more easily when she was trailing alone. It was like harder in some ways, but actually really more satisfying just to kind of feel that trail and follow it. And so I wish that I could give you all that experience here today, but I think the closest we can come is just being at in this forest where the animals are coming and going. And so we're gonna do a little bit of both. And I think, I don't know, I'm wanting to like remember for a second what it was like to be on trails with you. And to be in that silent wood, and we'd be looking at the ground, and we'd have all of our senses alert for hearing the birds, the different warblers that were coming in, or feeling the raindrops, sensing the changes in the wind, and noticing where might the deer be in that moment that we might be looking for. And then we would catch sight of the track of a deer on the ground. And I don't know if you all know, but deer tracks are pretty hard to confuse with other animals. They're very pointed, they have hooves, and they look like a little heart. I don't know if you can see, you don't need to come much closer yet, but deer tracks have this heart-shaped look. That's a moose track size, but for visual cues. And so you'll see these little points, and the points will be pointed in the direction that the animal is going. And if you see that, it's like, ooh, there's the clue. And we would look, and we'd say, well, is there another one? And we'd see if there's another one in line, about where you'd expect their next foot to step. And then we'd see, is there another one? And if you could find a consistent line of them, it was pretty obvious that it was a fresh trail. And then you could just like start to follow the trail. And we would be following the trail, and it was like sometimes so smooth. You'd just be kind of going, and you'd start to feel like a deer following the trail. And sometimes you would lose the trail. You'd have to stop and kind of put on your human mind again for a second and think, all right, where might the tracks go? Where might the trails go? And like, you know, troubleshoot. And then you could keep going again once you find the trail again. And being in a community like with you out there in the woods, where we worked together and we traded off like who was at the point following the trail and who was at the rear keeping track of the rest of what was going on in the woods. It just felt like this really old practice of what it would mean to be human. Be able to be out in silence together in the woods on a trail and experiencing the living world around us. And so I'm really grateful for that. And I want to express gratitude. We like to start with gratitude in all of our offerings to the animals themselves who are here and who let us see their tracks, and to our ancestors who kept us alive and kept us alert and given us the skills to be natural trackers. And because this is so hardwired in all of our DNA, and so it can just be easy to track and trail. And I want to express gratitude to the native people of this place. Here we're on Passamaquoddy territory, and the Passamaquoddy people have been tending this part of the world for generations, eons, and made sure that there's a place for people and animals to live together. And so I'm really committed to uplifting and supporting those people and their tending for many generations into the future as well. So with all that gratitude, I kind of want to jump in on some tracks. I wonder if we're ready.
I'm ready.
You want to add anything?
I think that's good.
Yeah.
The dogs want to add some things. They're leaving some tracks for us to follow. I'm gonna check my notes. This is an unscripted presentation. So sometimes, I noted here, sometimes it's hard to see clear prints. And when you're introduced to tracking, people sometimes think tracking is just clear prints. It's like seeing the footprints and identifying them, which is a fun part of tracking. But it's not always easy to see clear prints. And there's a few different ways to track. One is to look for the footprints and look for the perfectly clear prints. And if you can see them and be like perfectly obvious that what this is, that's great. You can look in the field guide and you can figure it out. Another is to learn to look for the general shapes of different animals' feet. And they have kind of distinct shapes that they leave even in not very clear substrates. So you can look at the shapes. Another is to look for trails, which is like a long disturbance that you can see going off into the future, right? And then a third is look for sign. And so we're going to start with some of the shapes, and then we're going to do some trailing. And maybe if we have time at the end, we'll just poke into the woods here. I haven't scouted it all, but there's probably some sign we can find if we want to. So let's think about shapes for a second. Do you remember any of the shapes that we talked about on tracks? I don't have a plan for this yet.
Maybe like oval versus round.
Yes, let's start with that one. So animals' feet, we have some good examples here. They leave an impression in the ground. Actually, the deer might be a good one to start with. We just drew it right here. So deer leave heart-shaped tracks, and all ungulates leave heart-shaped tracks. And so you can look at these drawings that we made and just notice that there's a very distinct point at one end, and then there's two lobes at the other end. That's because the deer and all the ungulates, moose, deer, elk, etc., are walking basically on two of their toes that have adapted, and the toenails have turned into hooves. and the other toes are a little further up the foot so they don't actually hit the ground. So a hoof is basically like 2 toes. It's so cool. And sometimes you see this other thing, which is these dew claws at the back, which are actually 2 of the other toes that have adapted. So you'll see the impression of the heart shape with the 2 little like impressions at the back. And which direction is it going? The way it's pointing. So convenient. I love this. So deer, you know, this is about, would be a large deer track, but you know, they're about that big. Moose would be about as big as my hand. And it's just really easy and fun to see them. So heart shapes, ungulates. Hanlon suggested ovals and circles as tracks. So no animal has like a perfectly circular foot that just leaves a circle in the ground. But when an animal leaves a track in a substrate like this sand or some snow that doesn't take the print of every single toe, there's an overall impression of the track that gets left. And so you'll often, maybe you've seen this, you'll often see in the snow just like kind of messy prints that go along. And it's sometimes all you can see is the sort of shape of the indentation. And 2 of the common ones we see are canines and felines, and one is an oval and one is a circle. And I'm wondering if anyone has a guess about why one would be more of an oval and one would be more of a circle, or that you want to speak. There's dog tracks all over here. Let's look at them. So here's a dog track. There's 2 toes across from each other, 2 more toes across from each other, a little pad impression down here, and then claws that are pretty noticeable up at the top. And so if I were to draw around that, get the entire track within the line, what shape is that?
An oval.
It's an oval. I kind of exaggerated at the top. So if we're gonna put the track in here, dog tracks have these parallel toes on either side, and then 2 other parallel toes in the front, and then they have a pointed heel pad. My teacher Sue Morse says it's pointed like the pointed muzzle of a dog. And then they have these claws that register. They're always out. They can't really pull their claws in like a cat can. So when you try to look at the impression of a dog track, it's more oval. Yeah, it's kind of cool. And it's parallel, right? So these are right across from each other, these are across from each other. And there's this thing with dog tracks where you can look at an actual dog track, I bet, and see this, where you can put an X right through the track, and it goes in between the toes. It won't touch any of the toes. And let's see if there is one. Yeah, here's one here. So this is like, these are the toes, and that's the heel pad or the palm pad. And there's this space in between right here and right here, which does not have any toe or heel impression in it, that makes an X. And oftentimes that gets left behind in a track as it's disturbed or melting out. You'll just see this oval shape with a slightly raised X inside. It's super helpful. And my teacher, again, Sue Morse from Keeping Track in Vermont, she used to make us repeat after her, X marks the spot. Repeat.
X marks the spot.
Spot marks the X.
Spot marks the X.
To remember that it's a dog track. Cat tracks don't make the X, and they don't have the same oval shape because they have a slightly different orientation of their toes. So you can look at your own hand actually for a second, and you'll see the general orientation of cat toes if you take your thumb out of the way, because remember, they don't have all their toes registering on the ground. It's like up here. Yeah. So when a cat puts their toes down, it actually is they're all a little bit offset. And none of them line up perfect. So I'll draw it here because it's a little easier to see drawn.
You want a smaller stick?
Maybe, yeah, thank you. But you can have, so there'll be like there's a little toe down here. It's very kind of pointy. And then there'll be another toe just up from that. Then there's a leading toe that sticks out above the other one. And then another one that's slightly down and offset from the second one. So none of them the tips are not parallel with each other. You can't line up any tips of these toes. And then cats have usually a bigger palm pad, and it has a little indentation in it, like an M. And Sue Morse, my beloved teacher, made us repeat after her, M for meow.
M for meow.
To remember the cat. So the cat track, they also have retractable claws.
Yeah.
Sometimes they put their claws in and sometimes they don't. So when you draw a circle around, when you draw around the cat track, it's much more circular. I'm just going to do a smaller one inside of this to see it. And the front and rear are a little bit, I mean, they're not, I'm drawing it slightly exaggerated so you can get the general pattern of it. Sometimes when you see it in the wild, it's not quite so obvious, but I tracked a bobcat last year with my friend Sierra Henrys, who's on our staff, and it was so obvious. It was just like circle, 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 just going off across the field there in freedom. And it was such a joy. It's like from far away, we could see there were these perfectly circular tracks just leading up into the woods. And because I knew this pattern, I was able to say, I think that might be a bobcat. I think it might be worth going across the whole snowy field and like finding that track, and we followed it.
That's so cool.
Yeah. There's some other patterns that we talked about. We talked about at the Wildwood Path before. Do you remember any of them? Should I tell you?
I don't think I remember.
Okay.
Tell me,
So
please.
we talked about stars, which are 5-pointed tracks, and star tracks are often, is that 5? Yeah. They're often in the weasel family. So you'll see they have 5 toes on the front and the rear. And there's different levels of webbing between the feet, and they're different sizes. All the weasel family has 5 toes, front and rear, so it's pretty easy to remember if you see that. Sue would say minkle, minkle, little star.
Minkle, minkle, little
To remember the 5, the star-like mink tracks. But all the weasels are a small mink, but all the weasels have those 5. There are other animals that have 5 toes that you might encounter, like raccoons and skunks, bears, that don't leave star-like tracks, but that look is pretty specific.
Okay.
And then I mean, there's so many. I don't want to try to take all of our time right now going through all of the different species of animals and the shapes of their feet and the number of toes, because I think there's only so much. Yeah, so you're like, oh, I have feet. Aren't my feet interesting? But you can look for these patterns and it can help you remember. But I'll go over one more pattern before we stop. You want to walk across our tracks? Okay, go ahead. Which is the bounders. So these are like little clusters of tracks that you'll see that aren't just individual footprints, but are groups of lots of little tracks. And so what you'll often see is you'll see 2 dots right next to each other. And then you'll see 2 other dots that are slightly bigger, slightly offset from those. So this is actually all 4 feet of an animal when you see this pattern.
Really?
Yeah, it's not toes anymore. We're talking about a little animal, and they are just bounding along, and they're leaving impressions of all of their feet. And if you look closely, you can see, oh look, there's little toes in there. Yeah, but from far away, I've actually confused a rabbit trail for a moose trail.
Oh,
Because I saw the impression of it, yeah, and I was like, that's definitely a moose. And I got closer, and it was totally a snowshoe hare track that just looked kind of like the shape of a foot. But these tracks that you see, most often in the woods of Maine, they are what? Who makes this kind of tracks? There's a few different species. Rabbits. Squirrels. Chipmunks. Think small. Mice.
Who else?
The basic ones
Yeah.
that you'll see. And there are smaller animals that don't make this kind of tracks, like voles and shrews generally tend to
I
run.
was gonna ask about voles. I'm like, voles?
Voles actually have this thing where they trot. They love to trot. We're about to talk about trotting.
Okay, alright.
And so you often see this trotting pattern at a very tiny scale, like just like a dog track, but it's a vole track. And it's really cute. And you'll see them like in the mouse trail, there'll be a little vole trail. But yeah, so these are actually, do you know which feet these are? You do.
Wait, let me take a guess. The back feet.
Okay, so think about a squirrel. Think about how big their back feet are compared to their front feet.
They're bigger.
Okay, so you're saying
So these are the back feet.
these are the back feet
Yeah.
and these are the front feet.
Yes.
Great, you got it. This is the real challenging question. Which direction is this animal going?
This way.
Yes, most people get that wrong.
Really?
Because what the animals do is they actually put their front feet down and then they bound and their back feet swing around their front feet and land in front of their front feet.
You know what? Maybe it's because I actually had a rabbit.
Yeah, so you got to see, like, well, obviously they're going that way. Clearly their back feet are in front of their front feet. So let's try to bound. This is really fun. And see if you can get your back feet to swing around in front of your front feet. Take some force. Yes, perfect. Awesome. You're bounding. And now look at your tracks. Dogs are like, what is happening? What are you doing? And see if you can see. Yeah, I can see right here. Here's my hands. There's my foot.
I feel like my feet didn't quite make it over.
Yeah, so
I can't tell it's
it's hard in the sand. So what happens when your feet, now do it without your feet going over. Now just hands and then your back feet. What kind of animal does it feel like? Yes. Yeah, this is how frogs move. They hop. So bounding is when your back feet swing all the way around your front feet.
That's so wild.
And hopping is when your back feet land at the same distance behind your front feet. And that's what frogs do. So we're getting into trail patterns. And I think we can take a minute on this. So once you move beyond just individual feet, you get into what the trail looks like. So you can picture like this track, this bounding track, going to leave a pattern all along the ground. So what we say is that animals move in a gait. The gait is like how they move their body. Okay, Merlin, you're going to walk with Hanlon. Do you want to call him? Merlin is walking at a very slow, under-step walking gait right now. He is yes, can't be bothered to run. And that gait leaves a certain pattern of footprints on the ground, which is called the track pattern. And so if you learn the track patterns that different gaits leave, you can look at a trail and you'll know exactly how that animal was moving in the moment that they walked there. Which is so neat, right?
That's so cool, yes.
And so it's pretty obvious with the bounding. You know, it's like,
Right, it's really
see
going.
the feet, they're very clear. With the four-legged animals that move in this kind of gait, it gets a little more complicated. So you got to learn to look for specific changes in the pattern on the ground that tell you how they're moving. So,
You mean like the width, maybe?
oh, exactly.
Okay.
And we're going to not try to get into every detail of like a rotary gallop versus a transverse gallop versus a blah, blah, blah. We're going to start with the basics, and we're going to talk about broken gaits and unbroken gaits.
Okay.
As a first pass. So, unbroken gaits means the rhythm is the same, and the pattern on the ground is just like, it just continues without major spacing in between each of the footsteps. So like, this is an unbroken gait. I'm just walking. I'm not breaking the pattern. I'm not breaking the rhythm. And what's the you know the trail I lead, right? Okay. So actually, it's convenient because humans walk exactly like deer. If you walk with me and just allow your arms to swing, you start to feel yourself being a little like a deer. And then if you lean over and you let your arms keep swinging, the dogs are like, I'll show you how it's done. Then you can start to feel like your feet, your hands might touch the ground. And just let your fingertips touch on every step and see where your feet land relative to your fingertips. In like an easy, slow walk.
Now I'm thinking about it and I'm like, wait, how does
I know, don't think about it too much. You just gotta let your,
Which hand?
just let your hands swing.
Okay.
And then as your hands are swinging, lean over and let them touch wherever they touch. And see where your feet touch. Merlin, you're bothering the people. So you can see right now from how Estephanie is walking that her fingers are touching and then they're getting picked up and then her foot is landing exactly where her fingers just were. So the trail that gets left with 4 feet looks pretty much the same as the trail that gets left with 2 feet when you're walking in this alternate rhythm. Alternating rhythm. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
Yeah. So you can try again. And you could try if you wanted to pick up the pace slightly. And this would be considered a trot. We've gone from a walk to a trot. And in this gait, my feet are actually slightly ahead of where my hands were. Because I'm moving a little faster. So I'm going along. And so the trotting pattern, again, very similar alternate walk, but the hind feet are slightly ahead of the front feet. Then if you pick up the pace a little more, you start having to pick up, I gotta get a breath. Too much trotting. If you pick up the pace a little more, you can't just have that gait like this anymore, right? The swing, 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 alternate walk, unbroken rhythm. You can picture a dog or a horse. You know how they run, right?
Yeah.
They're like, and they leave these little like pods of tracks, like right in one place, and they're flying through the air. There's another little group of tracks, and then they're flying through the air again. So there's a point in their trail where all of their feet are off the ground at the same moment. They're like me, and that's what's called the broken gait. So we can do it with skipping.
Okay.
If you want to practice a broken gait, you can skip, 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 skip. You can feel that you're like flying through the air for a little moment. That's what, come on dog, show us how it's done. Come on, come on, yes. Oh, so good. Merlin just did a perfect gallop. It might have been a lope. Oh my gosh, look at him. So when you're following a trail, if you're following a trail of an unbroken gait, you expect the next track to be about the same distance away every time, right?
Yes.
You know, like you're going along like this.
Expecting it now.
Yeah, and you know where to look. But what happens when the animal picks up the pace a little bit? Runs to the pattern. It spreads out. Yeah, so if you start to go along and the tracks are like this far apart in an alternate walk, and then they get a little farther apart and a little further apart, what might you think might happen next?
They started running.
They can start running, and then they're going to go into that broken gait, where there's like a little pod of tracks and then space, and then a little pod of tracks and then space. And so you look for the changes in the trail, in the pattern, to understand what the animal is doing. So what animals walk like this? Let's just list them off, this kind of walk.
The skating one.
Humans.
Humans.
Deer. Canines? Totally. So what does canines mean for the listeners who are new? Yeah, coyotes, foxes, dogs. If you're in other parts of the world, then like jackals, you know? Who else?
Goats?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
They're in the ungulate family. Yep,
Yeah.
goats, sheep. And then cats. They're the tricksters because they don't want to look like the other ones, so they walk very like slow and cool. But they are walking that same way. They do the same kind of patterns. So there's a couple other species of animals that have to walk on all fours like this, but they don't move their hands and their legs opposite each other the way we do in what's called an alternate or a diagonal walk. They actually swing the entire left side of their body and then the entire right side of their body.
So like a waddle?
Like a waddle. You can practice and just see, who do you feel like as you waddle like this? What animal feels like, I am this animal right now? Oh yeah.
Like,
Bears.
Tafra.
Tephra. My dog has a odd waddling pattern, unlike a dog. And raccoons. Porcupines. A lot of these animals have kind of a waddle about them. And one thing to notice that helps to remember is when you're trotting or walking on all fours diagonally, like we were just doing, like a dog or a deer, you actually have to have your weight pretty far forward on your front paws to like really trot that way. And when you're waddling, your weight is a little further back. And so this helps to remember the size of the feet. Because the size of the feet often correlates to where the most weight is held on the body. Isn't this kind of interesting?
Yeah.
So, you know, a bear or a raccoon, they often have slightly larger hind feet because their weight is a little bit more on their hind feet. And you can picture them, they're always like getting up and kind of doing things with their hands. And they're going back down and they waddle along.
Yeah.
Dogs, they have more, if you, come here Tefra, show us your hilarious shape of your body. Come on, Tefra, come here. Yeah, so she has like a big barrel chest and then kind of small little hips in the back. And dogs are, I mean, their weight is actually pretty balanced on both of them. But like often like a slightly more on the front. And it impacts the size of their paws. They have slightly larger front paws. So, I don't know, should we do more? There's so many more. We've only started touching on these animals, but you can look for those waddlers and the waddling tracks. I guess I just want to think about what the track pattern would look like briefly before we leave them behind. It's a little different. So let's have a clear-ish spot here. I'm gonna waddle and I'm gonna pull this whole, this is my front paw, right? My back paw is coming in right next to it. So there's gonna be a little front paw, back paw next to each other. And then this is my other front paw, and now my other back paw is coming in right next to it. So as I waddle, I actually have a front paw next to a hind paw on most of my tracks. It's like if you don't do it yourself, it's kind of hard to imagine how that could be. You guys at home should be definitely doing this. And then there's some animals, I'm going to tell them the raccoon trick because I feel like they should know that. There's some animals that leave very distinct patterns that make it pretty clear which ones they are. And the raccoon is one of them. So they almost always do this, what's called an extended overstep walk, where they're waddling and their back foot comes way over next to their front foot. And their other back foot comes way over, and they just, I don't know, they're just flexible that way. And then what ends up happening is that they have a back foot next to a front foot, and then a front foot next to a back foot, like this, and then one like that, and one like that, and they make a zigzag pattern in their tracks. So if you draw a line from the toes here, the toes here, the tips of the toes here, whoops, here, the tips of the toes here, the tips of the toes here, end up with this zigzag of tracks, which is distinctive of a raccoon. Okay. And so I've seen this before from a car. I've been like looking down at a frozen river and I've seen this zigzag of tracks and I've been like, oh, raccoon. And I go down there and I check. Sure enough, there's 5 fingers on each track. They look like little hands and they're going along in raccoon zones. Sue Morse, God bless you, says, remember, Z is for Zorro, who wears a mask.
Z is for Zorro, who wears a mask.
And that's how you can remember that the Z-shaped pattern is the raccoon. It's pretty good, yeah. Feels like we're kind of short on time for this video. I don't think we should go on a big wander through the whole forest looking for sign.
Okay.
But I think we should take like 10 or 15 seconds of a little challenge to see if any of us can find any animal sign on the edge of this forest, on the edge of this beach here.
All right, what's the challenge?
The challenge is look for evidence that an animal was here. A bite mark, a piece of fur, hair, a scratch on the ground, claw marks, a footprint, like anything in this area that we can say, like, I think an animal was here. So let's see if we can do it. Mariah is an animal, but she's a resting human, so we're just allowing her to be herself, resting on the beach. So,
Okay.
feel free to follow us around, hilarious camera person. So first I looked along the sticks to see if any of them had been chewed by beavers. That would be sign. And now I'm looking at this tree to see if I can see any places where little bits of bark have been flicked off by a climbing animal or any scratches. That would be sign. I'm looking for holes bored in trees by like birds, woodpeckers. They're used as nests or for feeding. see if anything like that is showing up right around here. Yeah, there's a bunch of bark flicked off that tree.
This one?
Yeah. Oh, there's actually a hook in this tree. That's a sign
That's a sign.
of human animals. Looking to see if there's any scat on the ground, any species. You might see little pellets that would show you that it was an ungulate, small ones for deer or larger ones for moose. Or you might see a little pile of poop that looks kind of like what you'd see at home with the dog. Yeah, bite marks, browse is a thing you could look for, bitten off tips. You might see bitten off branches on the ground that animals have gone up to trees and bitten and then they've dropped. Yeah. What else might we find? Oh, you could find a bed, potentially.
Oh, yeah.
Scratched up. Oh dear. This is a bed.
It is?
Yeah, it's subtle,
Okay, I'm coming.
but come check it out. There's this spot right here that you can see somebody's removed the top layer of these pine needles from this area.
Oh.
And you can see the spot underneath. I don't know how to age this really right now or tell of a species of it, but somebody clearly scratched that off.
Yeah.
It didn't just randomly get completely bare right there.
I see a lot of little holes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It looks either really old or like it was a scratch that someone then used as a scent post. Like they might scratch it up and then urinate on it to make their urine smell stronger. Yeah, let's just look up here as we end here. Look at these tracks in the moss as we go. You can see these human tracks. I'm following Estephanie's track. Alright. I can pick up some trash on the way. Help out this forest. Oh yeah, I see little holes. Totally. Oh my goodness. I think we might have heard these while we were over here before. The creatures who use these holes. Did you hear red squirrels?
I didn't.
When we first got here?
No. Is that who would be living in here?
I think so. I don't think I've seen any chipmunks here. Let's see. If we go up, we would probably encounter at some point game trails. And you could see like, oh, there's a little line that we can see heading out through there that we could follow. And then along there, that's where you'd look for tracks and sign and scat. Yeah, it's a little old looking, but these do look like tracks going up this slope here. See these impressions?
Yes.
And then heading up, see those little impressions in this ground there? You can see there's a pattern of them. And maybe we could follow it? You want to see if it goes on?
Yeah.
Dogs are here to mess everything up. They're helping. Teffer, you're not supposed to make tracks where we're trekking.
No.
Teffer, can you lie down, please? Teffer, down. Sitting is fine at that angle. Did they continue?
Well, I'm trying to... I don't know now.
Okay, we're going to end this lesson here and say this is what is fun. You go out and you're like, is this a trail? I don't really know. Do they continue? Let's crawl around and look. Let's go a little further. Maybe there's more. Maybe we'll find scat and it'll prove that it actually is a trail. And I want to invite all of you who are watching, thank you for watching us and for participating in this hilarious, not very well organized and designed trekking class. I hope it was helpful for you. I hope it inspired you to find a place, whether it's your local park, whether it's a dirty sidewalk, whether it's a forest like this, and go and look for a sign of animals or birds and see, you know, hey, who else is moving around in here? What sign are they leaving of their presence? You know, how are they impacting this place? And start to think about how might you impact them for the better through your relationship with them and through your attention that you give to them. You want to add anything to that?
I think one of the biggest lessons while I've been a part of the Wildwood Path is really just to pay attention. of who's around me, if I can see anything, and also think about the relationships that we have with whoever is around me, how they influence me and how I influence them.
Do you agree, Morgan?
What do you think, Morgan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And have fun.
And have fun, exactly. And then that ripples out into the whole rest of the world, and hopefully in really beautiful ways. Awesome. See you in the woods.